Hi, this is Mr. B again, still flapping his gums about IB English Language and Literature and the individual oral. So the previous 4 videos have taken you through everything you need to do to prepare. I then showed you in the previous video exactly what preparation I did before I had a go at doing the individual oral. This is your opportunity to hear how my presentation went and to have a go at using the mark scheme to identify what mark you think I should have got. And you'll then be able to hear what mark the IB assessor and the teachers that were there gave me, and I'll talk you through why I got the marks that I did and where I could have improved. So you are going to have a copy of the mark scheme coming up on screen shortly. As you listen to the recording of my individual oral, keep that mark scheme in front of you and criterion by criterion decide how well do you think I've done. Now, if you are struck straight away that, oh, Mr. B is doing a terrible job at this, start quite low down on the mark scheme. If you think, oh wow, he's doing a good job on this, start at the top band on the mark scheme. If you are unsure whether to put me in one band or another, then the IB would say that you should, whichever band seems the best fit, the one that ticks most of the boxes, put me in that band, but maybe put me at the bottom of that band. Okay, so as you are listening, try and interpret what mark you would have given me out of 10 for each of the assessment criteria. Try and identify on a list what went well, what do you think was good about what I did, and try and identify some even better ifs, the things that you think I should do to improve. So if you've got the slideshow in front of you, you can click on that link and you can listen to my audio recording. If you haven't got the slideshow in front of you, stay tuned. When the mark scheme appears on screen, that is when you should hear the audio recording cue in on the video. Okay, so the global issue that I have chosen to focus on for this assessment is arranged marriages of child brides around the world, and that falls within the culture, identity and community strand for this assessment. The reason I chose this was because the UN estimates that across the developing world, 1 in 3 young women are forced into marriage before they turn 18. And 1 in 9 are forced into marriage before they turn 15. There are 15 million forced marriages of child brides across the world every year, and a lack of education and living in poverty are the 2 biggest contributing factors that get girls into that situation, and they end up suffering domestic abuse, sexual abuse and PTSD, and we see the effects of that in one of the 2 texts that I've chosen in particular. The 2 texts that I've chosen are 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. It's the literary text. It's a novel from 2007, originally written in English. It's set in Afghanistan, which is one of the countries. It's number 17 in the world for forced child marriages for girls. In Afghanistan, 9% of girls are forced into marriage before they turn 15, and 35% are forced into marriage before they turn 18. The novel follows the story of 3 women across a 50-year time span, starting with Mariam, whose story we pick up in the late 1950s and early 1960s, through to her adoptive granddaughter Aziza via her adoptive daughter Layla in between. Both Mariam and Layla are forced into marriage with the same man, Rashid, and despite the initial animosity between them, they end up having a quasi-mother-daughter relationship as the novel goes on. The other text that I have chosen to use for this is a non-literary text. It's a memoir written by Marjan Satrapi, who is an Iranian author. She chooses to present her memoirs in the form of graphic representations, so in cartoon form. She's most famous for her first 2 memoirs, the Persepolis books, which dealt with her childhood in Iran, and then when her parents sent her away to Austria for school. But she then returns to Iran at the end of Persepolis 2 for her university education, and Embroideries, the text I've chosen, picks up her story once she's back in Iran and has graduated from university. Child marriages are less significant in Iran than they are in Afghanistan, but 3% of girls in Iran are put into forced marriages before the age of 15, and 17% of girls are put into forced marriages in Iran before the age of 18. Satrapi herself was not placed in that position, but in Embroideries, the memoir focuses on conversations she's having with various women in her family, and many of the older generation are talking about the forced marriages that they were placed into, and the extract focuses on one, her aunt Parveen, who is telling her about her forced marriage when she was 13. And so the extract from Embroideries starts with Satrapi herself sitting there talking to Parveen, discovering that her aunt, who is a very glamorous modern Iranian woman, had been put into a forced marriage 50 years earlier when she was 13 years old. And it's Parveen telling Marjan Satrapi all about the circumstances of that forced marriage and the devastating effect it had on her as a child. The extract from A Thousand Splendid Suns comes from the beginning of the novel, which is split into 4 distinct sections, and section 1 is all about Mariam, her childhood, and her forced marriage to Rashid. She was born as an illegitimate daughter to a man called Jalil. He kept her separate from the rest of his children, making occasional visits on a weekly basis that Mariam would get very, very excited about. And in chapter 6 of the novel, she had made a journey to go and visit her father in his house for the very first time. And she had not been allowed in the house. She'd been forced to sleep on the streets, and it had broken her heart. But the next morning, her father has taken her into the house, has taken her in for a few days, because when Mariam has gone home, her mother has been so broken by her abandoning her to go to her father's house that she has committed suicide. But rather than get lumbered with Mariam in the long term, Mariam's father has arranged a marriage for her with a man in Herat, which is about 600 kilometres from in Kabul, which is about 600 kilometres from Herat, where they live. So basically trying to get rid of her. So chapter 7, where the extract comes from, is the moment where Mariam is told that she is going to be put into a forced marriage. So the first thing that I want to look at comparing the two texts is how adults, and parents in particular, are seen as being a threat to children, particularly to daughters, and how they maintain all their control. So in the extract from the novel, in line 13, one of Jalil's wives tells Mariam, actually, your father has already given Rashid his answer. Rashid is here in Herat. He's come all the way from Kabul. Mariam is given absolutely no choice. The author tells us, your father has already given Rashid his answer. So the choice of marriage is completely denied to her. Again, in line 30, when Mariam questions her father about him making this decision for her, her father says, God damn it, Mariam, don't do this to me. The implication being that he is the victim here, not her. So he has all the control. Similarly, in the extract from Embroideries, if you look in panel 3, the parent is presented as the threatening control through the way that Satrapi has drawn the panel. The parent is drawn as a dark, ominous silhouette in a medium close-up, which makes them look like some kind of menacing ogre. We don't see their face, we just see them giving the order to Parveen as a child to summon her, to tell her that she's going to be put into a forced marriage. in comparison to that, my second point I want to make is how children are seen as being innocent and without control. So in that same panel, in panel 3, whereas the parent is this dark, menacing silhouette in medium close-up, Parveen, the girl, who's only 13 here, we see her in long shots so that we can see her on the swing, engaging in something that generally children do when they go to a playground. We see her dressed in a bright child's dress with her hair flying. She looks like she's having the time of her life on that swing. In panel 4, we then see that same parent, this time with the aggressive gesture pointing at the daughter, and we see Parveen herself again in a medium close-up so that we're able to focus on the fact that she's got her arms defiantly crossed, she's got her brow furrowed, and she's crying. She's got tears coming down her face. She knows that in the face of her mother saying to her, "You will get married," she has no choice. Back in A Thousand Splendid Suns, we see Mariam feeling like that she's an innocent with no control. In line 11, she starts off saying to her father, tell them you won't let them do this. In line 18, tell them, Mariam cried. In line 28, say something. She's desperately pleading with her father, and she is getting absolutely nowhere, and has no power over this situation. This being forced into a marriage is a very abrupt and painful transition to womanhood in both texts. So in the first 10 lines of the extract from A Thousand Splendid Suns, we have Mariam imagining what her future with Rashid is going to be like. And there is a repetition of the phrase, she would have to, listing all of the demands that would be placed on her as she becomes a woman at the age of 13, and in particular being told about the painful acts of perversity that her husband is going to force her to endure. In other words, forcing her to have sex with him. In embroideries, we see this painful transition to womanhood taking place in panel 5. And in panel 5, it's a symbolic moment where Parveen, as an older woman, is telling us about the pain she remembers of having her eyebrows plucked. And that is supposed to be symbolic of the painful process of being wrenched from childhood into adulthood. They plucked her eyebrows to present her as a bride, and she had. This is symbolic of the transition to becoming a woman. Finally, in both texts, child brides are objectified and commodified. In the extract from A Thousand Splendid Suns, in line 22, we get a reference to a clock ticking in a cabinet, and by the end of the extract, lines 33 to 42, Mariam is focusing on a table in the room where she is sitting, and it's a beautiful table, finely carved, beautifully polished, and both the clock and the table are supposed to represent the possessions her rich father has. She has become merely another rich possession to be given away in this act of arranged marriage. We see that same objectification and commodification of child brides in embroideries, in particular in panel 6. And in panel 6, we see what should be a very happy, smiling wedding photograph, but it's presented as a wob, white on black, which are used traditionally in magazines and newspapers to represent tragedy. You put white text on a black background. Here you've got a white dress bride on a black background, and she describes herself not as a child, not as a woman, but as a little whore. That's what she feels her father has made her by arranging a marriage for her.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for this, Lee. Can you tell us a bit more about the role of other women in the two texts and how their perspective contributes to the global issue?
So, for example, in A Thousand Splendid Suns, once Mariam has been married for a significant period of time to Rashid, she has proved unable to carry children. She has 6 miscarriages, and so when one of the neighbours' house is bombed during the civil war in Afghanistan, Layla, the neighbour's daughter, is taken into Rashid's house, and he forces her into marriage as well. When she enters into that marriage, it's for exactly the same reason. Mariam felt she had no choice because her father was abandoning and selling her. Layla also feels she has no choice because she's been left as an orphan, and it's very much that she needs to cling on to Rashid to actually give her a means of survival. In embroideries, it's Marjan Satrapi's grandmother who is able to give the other older woman's perspective on forced marriages in Iran, because she too was placed in a forced marriage, but it turned out that she ended up having a very loving marriage with her first husband, but not as loving as the man that she chose to marry much later in life when her first husband had died.
How is the extract from Satrapi does express a lot of opinions. How is the emotion of women being expressed in the graphic novel?
The emotion, did you
Yeah.
say? So Parveen is angry. She's looking back with anger at this this being forced into a marriage. Interestingly, in the panels that follow directly after the last one that I chose for my extract, she goes on to tell us that when she went for her wedding night with her new husband, who is 69 years old, she's 13, she refuses to sleep with him, puts her clothes back on and runs out of the house and goes to her aunt's house. And then she basically hides out at her aunt's house for 4 years and waits for the old man to die and then claims a portion of his inheritance. So you see her looking back in anger at being forced into it, but because she's now a very modern Iranian woman, she's also she takes great relish in telling us that actually she found a way around the system, and she just bided her time until the old man died, and then she could go looking for love.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
So, you've heard my presentation now. Hopefully, you've been able to put me criterion by criterion where you think I should be on the mark scheme. Hopefully, you've made a list of what went well and what you think could have gone better. So, hopefully, you've got a mark out of 40 ready to award me as well. I'm now going to tell you that when my presentation was awarded 39 out of 40. So at this point you might say, way to go Mr. B, good job. Or you might say, how did you lose that 1 mark? I have to say, preparing for this was one of the most stressful things I've had to do in recent years as part of my teaching career. I did find the whole process extremely stressful during the 15 minutes. Partly because I did not do enough practice, because I'm a busy working teacher running a sixth form and I don't have time to do as much practice as students do. But afterwards I was able to reflect on the feedback that I got from the teachers in the room and the IB assessor, and I completely agree with them that I should have lost that 1 mark. So let's look criterion by criterion why I got the mark that I did. So for criterion A, I scored full marks because the IB assessor said that I demonstrated excellent knowledge and understanding of not only the extracts but also the text that they came from. Part of that was because I'd structured my presentation to focus on the context for the first half of the presentation and the extracts in the second half. I was able to make references to the extracts and the texts as a whole to support the argument I was putting forward, my thesis about the global issue. So that was criterion A. For criterion B, my ability to analyse both the extracts, I also scored 10 out of 10 because the IB assessor and the teachers in the room said that my analysis and evaluation of the extracts and the works were relevant to the global issue that I'd chosen. They were insightful about the global issue that I'd chosen, and that I demonstrated a thorough understanding of the authorial choices that had been made in presenting that global issue. In other words, I was able to use the technical language and the nuts and bolts of how a literary text is put together, how language is used, and how the features of a visual text, like embroideries, is used to be able to support what I was saying. Criterion D, even though I a lot when I talk, you'll have heard me probably 1,000 times in these 5 videos, the IB assessor gave me full marks for my Criterion D for language. She said that my language was clear, accurate and varied, and that my occasional errors do not hinder communication. So the fact that I do a lot didn't actually get in the way of me making sense and being clear when I was talking. And that I chose an effective style, register and tone when I was delivering my presentation. So I got full marks for Criterion D. Criterion C, which is all about focus and organisation, was where I lost my mark. And it's really important that you understand why I lost that mark. So I got 9 out of 10 for that one. Now in the mark scheme on that band, it says the oral maintains a clear and sustained focus on the task. Tick, I definitely did that in my presentation. Treatment of the extracts and the works or the text is well balanced. When I was talking about the 2 different extracts in the second half of my presentation, when I was talking about the 2 different texts in the first half of my presentation, I was balanced. I gave equal time to both texts. So the IB assessor didn't have a problem with that at all, and therefore I warranted being in that top band on the marks. The second bullet point on here though is the crucial one. It says the development of ideas is logical and convincing. Ideas are connected in a cogent manner. So the IB assessor and the teachers that were there said that my structure of my presentation was really good, that it made perfect logical sense to move through in the order that I did through my ideas. However, I lost a mark for this key word here, cogency. And the reason why I lost a mark for cogency is because I went over my 10 minutes when I was doing my presentation. I think I stopped short, just short of 12 minutes. Now my entire presentation, if you include the questions afterwards, is within the 15 minutes allowed by the IB. But because I'd gone over on my initial presentation, I lost a mark for cogency. So it is really worthwhile remembering that you need to stick to that 10 minutes for your presentation, otherwise you too could lose a mark for cogency at that point. The tip that I was given from the IB assessor was that I didn't actually need to go into as much detail as I did in the setup of the contexts of the global issue, the 2 texts that my extracts came from and the extracts themselves, that I could have done that in a more compressed way. So instead of aiming to spend 5 minutes on setting it up, 5 minutes on analysing the extracts, she suggested that I did maybe 4 minutes setting it up, 6 minutes analysing the extract, and if I could have shaved off time off my setup, then I would have finished within my 10 minutes allotted time, because that was the bit that went on too long in the presentation. You're now ready, having hopefully seen an example of a good individual oral that you can model your own on. Hopefully you've seen some good ideas in these videos for how to prepare your individual oral, and then how to get your annotated copies of your extracts prepared, and then how to practice. Hopefully this has all been useful for you. You've got some good ideas. Re-watch any of the videos to go back and remind yourself how to do stuff, but you should now be ready to do an amazing job at preparing for your own individual oral assessment for IB English Language and Literature, and I wish you the very best of luck in preparing for that. This has been Mr. B flapping his gums. See you soon.